common thread is to try to save what they have, to save their town, to maintain their way of life.
One point in the last year, 99% of the state of Iowa was in some sort of a drought classification.
Water's kind of a gift. It's not necessarily ours, but we like to claim, what our fair share is.
We talk about dryness begets dryness and wetness begets wetness. If you don't have any moisture for these thunderstorms to work off of, they won't go in that region or they'll just fizzle out. And this is what we saw last year as drought conditions started to form.
A drought sets in slowly. The dry conditions silently stealing precious moisture from the soil. The depletion may take months or even years. And by the time the drought's impact is apparent, the damage has already been done. Recovery from drought can last longer than it took to take hold. And a drought doesn't make the same noise as a flood or severe storms. It slowly dries up dreams. The state of Iowa ranks second only behind California for the top 10 agriculture-producing states. In 2018, the value of Iowa's agricultural industry was valued at just over $25 billion, according to the U.S. Department of Agriculture. In that same year, drought conditions began to creep into the Midwest, but its impact in Iowa would not be felt for 3 years. Scientists put much of the blame on climate change and its role in the increasing frequency and intensity of droughts in the Midwest. Many have banded together to solve the problem to, as much as they can, take control over what's next.
Funding for this program was provided by Friends, the Iowa PBS Foundation, as well as generations of families and friends who feel passionate about the programs they watch on Iowa PBS.
Funding for this program was provided by the Gilchrist Foundation, founded by Jocelyn Gilchrist, furthering the philanthropic interests of the Gilchrist family in wildlife and conservation, the arts and public broadcasting, and disaster relief. And by the Claude P. Small, Catherine Small Cousins, and William Carl Cousins Fund at the Quad Cities Community Foundation to support nature programming on Iowa PBS.
A 50-mile journey west of Des Moines lands you in the town of Casey. Founded in 1869, the town was named by the contractors bringing the railroad through Iowa. The town straddles the Adair and Guthrie County line, with a population of 387 as of the 2020 census. Lifelong Casey resident Nicholas Lindberg feels strongly about his town and his roots. When he was just 18 years old, he ran for and won a seat on Casey's city council. Now 23, Lindberg is learning on the job as he makes his way through his first term as mayor.
All I can say is if you're from a small town, you know. It's not what a lot of these large town people think. Oh, it's just a small town full of grumpy old people or quiet people who just don't want to be involved. No, that's completely opposite.
Like many rural communities, Lindberg is facing challenges brought on by Casey's shrinking pool of residents. A small population results in a smaller tax base, which in turn reduces the amount of funds Lindberg and other city officials have available to meet the needs of Casey's residents. To make matters worse, expanding drought conditions moved across the Midwest in 2020, putting an immense amount of stress on the town's aging water infrastructure.
When I first took office, we were starting to get into the pandemic, And then as the year went on, the drought began to set on. At first we weren't too worried because we've had droughts before. However, as it progressed, we began to get concerned because our wells are older. We had been looking at doing studies and other maintenance to try to rehabilitate them or get new ones.
In the summer of 2020, the Casey Public Works Director informed Mayor Lindbergh and the City Council the amount of water flowing into the town's water wells was slowing down, reducing the amount of available drinking water. As the drought intensified, so did the dire situation for Casey residents.
At first, everybody was kind of hoping that this would just resolve itself like all the other past droughts had done. But it soon became clear that we needed extra help.
Lindbergh and city officials issued water conservation orders for residents and notified the Iowa Department of Natural Resources the town of Casey, Iowa was running out of water.
We began to prepare and assume that we would eventually may need to close off part of the town's water supply to help rebuild some of our tower from the wells production we had.
Lindbergh enlisted the help of the Iowa Rural Water Association, a nonprofit group that provides technical assistance, training, and emergency response for 600 water and wastewater operators across the state of Iowa.
You know, last year with Casey, you know, it was one of our first systems that was having troubles, and you know, the first thing went on site to see what the issues were, what kind of problems they were having.
To help Iowa communities, McFarland depends on the solid working relationships the IRWA has between federal, state, and local officials to help communities with non-emergencies as well.
We communicate with the USDA on a daily, weekly basis and try to relay what needs we're seeing, what projects we're seeing, and they'll do the same. They'll call us and say, hey, do you know any of the history on this town? You know, what have you seen? What do you think their needs are?
In Casey's situation, their months-long emergency needed a quick solution.
One of the things we do is we work with the Iowa DNR. I made a phone call to the field office and was able to tell them and relay what the system was going through, what kind of problems it is, and that what we're looking at doing for a response. And that comes into seeing if you can fast track permits. In Casey's instance, we're looking at a well. So I asked the DNR if, you know, when their engineer gets all the construction permits written, can you fast track this for us so we can get it out, because the town is running out of water.
As the drought intensified, the situation in Casey became more urgent. Water restrictions were put in place. Mandatory overnight water shutoffs were instituted. Neighboring communities were reluctant to sell any water to Casey because of their own drought concerns. An emergency well was needed to help get more water flowing into town. But to do that, officials needed proper permitting for drilling to begin.
The DNR is very good and very responsive to our needs, so they absolutely guaranteed we'll have a 24-hour turnaround on this permit. We'll get it back to you as soon as possible, and yes, we'll do everything we can to help these people.
Mayor Lindbergh notes the quick partnership between state agencies and the community was the key to helping the town of Casey.
Come August, we put out a word for water conservation, and within that first month, we knew our community was helping us. They were right behind us. They were conserving water the best they could, buying us the time we needed to get a concrete solution and get this through. And what I didn't know, I asked, and we got advice from the DNR, from Iowa Rural Water Association, and my staff. Everybody rallied together, and that's what I really like about small towns like this. I dare say that small towns, they're more close-knit, they're more engaged than a lot of these larger cities are, and that's really what keeps us going. We're still here, and we're going to be here for a long time to come.
It is very tough because, you know, a lot of these small towns are shrinking, and rather than growing, they don't have that same tax base as they once did. Finding that that money to do these projects and to get people to believe in your project is an uphill battle. And it's one that's happening all over the state right now.
Incidents like these happen, and we have to be ready. We have to do what we can to prepare for it. And all we can do is do our best to meet it as it comes, to prepare for it, and to ultimately get through it, get our people through it.
While a drought is not as visual as other weather events, it is no less impactful. It's a disaster in slow motion.
And what's interesting this year is we're in drought. We're also seeing a lack of severe weather. Now, this is tied hand in hand because if you don't have thunderstorms to produce severe weather, you're not going to get any rainfall and we get dry.
The drought Iowa is experiencing in 2021 got its start in 2018. Ample subsoil moisture from the 3 wet years prior kept growing conditions stable as the chances for rain evaporated.
2019, 7th wettest fall on record, we start to see west central precipitation deficits begin to appear. Very small, but that's where we started to seed the drought conditions. So the interesting thing is when you look at 30-day precipitation deficits from wintertime getting into spring, you're going from the driest part of the year into the start of the wettest part. You're starting to drop off pretty dry days and add days that should be really wet climatologically versus 30 days, 60, 90 days ago. So within a week, you can see precipitation deficits just stick out like a sore thumb.
Dr. Justin Glisson is the state climatologist of Iowa. Glisson's job involves collecting climate data for weekly weather reports and the U.S. Drought Monitor. He also advises the Iowa Secretary of Agriculture on climatological issues impacting the state's agricultural sector.
And it's when you look at pictures of the dry pastures and the dust and the cattle, and you hear the stories of the farmers and ranchers up there, it breaks your heart. But I mean, yeah, when you see D4 on a map, those are historic percentiles, meaning that we haven't seen these conditions in 100 years.
According to Glisson, different types of drought impact rural communities in different ways. A meteorological drought is one based on rainfall deficits and lengths of dry periods. If the dryness continues, a shift to hydrological drought appears. Impacts to the overall water supply become visual as the level of streams and ponds gets lower. A third category of drought is signaled by subsoil moisture levels decreasing, and an agricultural drought sets in. Farmers and ranchers see lower groundwater levels as reservoir levels shrink. The fourth type of drought is socioeconomic. According to the National Weather Service, socioeconomic drought occurs when demand exceeds supply as a result of weather-related deficit in rainfall. Glisson notes climate change could have a hand to play in the increasing length and intensity of significant weather events.
As climatologists, we use the last full 3 decades to give us a baseline to compare weather events, climatological events. Was this the driest year on record? How strong was this tornado outbreak versus other outbreaks that we've had in the past? Was this the most destructive derecho that we've seen across the state? Climatologically, we expect 1 derecho every 2 years, statistically. So yes, we are seeing weather extremes, drought conditions. We see the mega drought in southern part of the southwestern part of the United States, and then polar vortices that form, colder extremes and warmer extremes. So we are seeing an increase in the extreme nature of events that we are seeing, yes.
One asset Dr. Glisson and other climatologists rely on to study drought patterns is the U.S. Drought Monitor, a tool multiple federal agencies are responsible for creating. The weekly report uses data from USDA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and the National Drought Mitigation Center. Climatological data is collected to calculate the severity of drought across the U.S. Drought information is broken out into 5 different categories. Abnormally dry, which shows areas that may be going into or are coming out of drought, and 4 levels of drought: moderate, D1, severe, D2, extreme, D3, an exceptional D4.
So the drought depiction is very subjective in certain moisture fields. So that's why when we talk about the drought monitor process, we want a convergence of evidence. All those moisture variables that we use, subsoil, precipitation, humidity outside, temperature, stream flows, all those, we want all of those things to point towards one category. And more often than not, they don't. That's where you get discrepancies.
Created in 1999 at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, the U.S. Drought Monitor has many purposes. The USDA uses the Drought Monitor to trigger disaster declarations. The Farm Service Agency uses it to help determine eligibility for their livestock forage program. And the Internal Revenue Service uses it for tax deferral on forced livestock sales when ranchers have to sell cattle due to drought. State and local officials use the Drought Monitor in conjunction with local data on dry conditions to trigger drought responses. While the U.S. Drought Monitor is a great source of data, nature is in charge of creating and changing it.
You do get timely rainfalls. The data point I use is the D3 drought in southeastern Iowa in August of 2018, while you had very, very wet conditions across the northern part of the state. You go 2 to 3 months after peak of drought, that part of the state had anywhere from 200 to 300% of above normal precipitation. So luck, perhaps, but the atmosphere drives the narrative. We can't change the weather. So, you get a farmer that's in D2, they get a thunderstorm that pops up over their house, they get 2 to 3 inches of rainfall in, let's say, an hour and a half. It's not gonna all soak in. That's not luck, that's just the ground is hard and it rained too hard.
Glisson notes the data collected since the creation of the Drought Monitor has helped officials project a path for future weather patterns.
So we're coming off 2 wet years. If you look at the 2012 drought, we were actually coming off of 3 to 4 pretty wet years. So there is a cycle in which we do get wet and we stay wet. On the flip side of that, we are dry and we stay dry. Now, we're not in a situation in which we're going to approach the 2012 drought or 1988 drought as we see things right now. If we look at the short-term outlooks and given precipitation deficits going back last year where the drought conditions started, west central Iowa, anywhere from 16 to 18 inches below average. August 2020 was third driest on record. We do have longer-term precipitation deficits.
The drought of 2012 was more severe than the drought being experienced this year. Dry conditions began in 2011, and by the time it reached its peak, over 75% of the state was in D3 or extreme drought, according to the U.S. Drought Monitor. The drought also was the longest in Iowa history, lasting 151 weeks when the rain finally returned in June of 2014. Before that, the worst drought was in 1988. And before that, it was 1979. According to the National Centers for Environmental Information, drought ranks third as the most destructive natural disaster in Iowa. From 1980 to 2021, severe drought caused nearly $20 billion in damage. Besides the direct and indirect economic impacts, drought can spur other disasters. The dry conditions can be ideal breeding for invasive insects like grasshoppers and locusts. Drought can increase wildfire risk, like what the western U.S. experienced in 2020 and 2021. And extended dryness can change ecosystems, altering farm production practices. When asked if climate change is part of the rise in weather events, Iowa Secretary of Agriculture Mike Negg acknowledges a correlation between the two.
I think, again, we know that weather's changing. We know that in a state like Iowa, we're seeing an increase in temperatures. We're seeing more frequent, higher intensity storms and weather events that are more persistent. When it's dry, it's dry. When it's wet, it's wet. And those are things that we have to deal with on the ground. And what does that mean for a producer? Well, again, it's about how do we manage the land appropriately, and do we have the right risk mitigation tools in place for them from a policy standpoint? So I think those are things. Look, weather's been a factor in agriculture for as long as we've been doing it. That's not new. What is new perhaps is the frequency and the intensity of those events. But I think we're well positioned to evolve like we need to accommodate for that.
By August of 2021, 83% of the state was in some sort of drought, with over 1/3 of Iowa experiencing severe to extreme drought. Those conditions took a toll on farming and agriculture.
Now, you talk about drought is basically the absence of moisture. It starts off meteorologically, lack of rainfall, meteorological drought. Then we get into agricultural drought, where we start to see moisture stress on corn and beans, especially this time of year. Field scouting last year, prior to the derecho in west central Iowa, we started to see soybeans leaves flipping over in the fields in the morning time. So where you would see basically emerald green fields, if we had substantial or enough moisture, you start to see gray fields. And then you start to get pineapple corn as the leaves on the lower part of the corn stalk firing, starting to show us that we're running out of subsoil moisture. The crop is expending it. Corn needs 25 inches during its physiological growth. So as the faucet kind of turned off mid-May into June, we get into lots of warm, low relative humidity, windy days. Atmosphere develops a thirst, pulls any moisture that it can get. Crop is transpiring. So those precipitation deficits are still there. It takes a lot to chip into those.
In 2019, Iowa ranked first in exports of corn and second in soybeans among the top 10 agricultural states. Prolonged dry spells can make trouble for row crops throughout the growing season. Certain commodities can be stunted or not even break through the hard, dry surface of the soil. As the drought worsened in 2021, the dry conditions slowed development of corn and soybeans. That may have lowered weights and yields for producers, potentially drying up profits. For cattle producers, dry, scorched pastures limited grazing opportunities for livestock, increasing feed costs.
It's tough. You go walk a farm, go visit with somebody who stepped out their back door one day after a storm event or a flood event and saw everything that they'd built, perhaps over their lifetime or certainly their career, wiped away or laying in a pile. And they oftentimes don't know where to start. But again, it's something where I feel a responsibility and an opportunity as the Secretary of Ag, but also as government being a partner and helping to folks to make that first step, or how can they start to rebuild. And again, it's not that anybody's ever made whole with any of these government programs or with an insurance payment, but it's about trying to get through. It's about trying to start the rebuilding process and farm again the next year. But I've seen some incredible stories of people who have lost everything, and they've been able to work back and be stronger than ever. So that's part of being Iowa. That's part of Iowa agriculture, and it's a special thing to see.
Near the western Iowa town of Avoca, Regional Water fulfills the water needs of 15 nearby communities and several large animal feeding operations in the area. Regional Water's drought stress system is now facing a battle of priorities.
Once upon a time, rural water systems, regional water in particular, came to this area because we were a source of good quality water. Everyone had a well. That wasn't the problem. Everyone had all the water they needed if they wanted to drink it. Now they're not looking at us just for quality, but they're looking for us for the supply to exist at all. It used to be most of the people who would call in asking to get onto our water system, they had a well already, but they were tired of how hard it was. They wanted better quality water. They had just moved to an acreage from the city and they missed having good water. Now, most of the calls we get are, our well ran dry. We're pumping water and we're not getting anything. Can you please get out to us because the water physically isn't there? And that's been a change for us, going from a model where people are coming to us because they want good water to it still wants to be good water, but the alternative is increasingly no water at all.
With the exception of large-scale animal feeding operations for hog producers, the bulk of the customers regional water serves are considered to be of lower socioeconomic status and have smaller annual incomes. As regional water works to meet the needs of all the users in the area, rate increases associated with the work have affected water customers differently.
We have people who call in and say that they have no power over the price at which pigs sell, and I understand that there's market players in effect who do get to decide that, or at least have some influence over that. But at the end of the day, if the water costs more money, and the pig costs more money.
According to Regional Water, wells in the area are becoming harder to operate as dropping water levels leave treatment facilities struggling to maintain adequate services. One option is to drill more wells, which solves a problem for the short term, but it is not a permanent solution.
Well, the worst case scenario absolutely would be that I get the phone call from the treatment plant and they say the wells are straight up dry, that they're making, that we turn on the motors and they're just making sucking noises like you get when you run a straw at the bottom of a milkshake that's empty, only, there's a 20 horsepower motor hooked to that straw.
Another option is to dig fewer and deeper wells, which brings its own set of issues. While Regional Water sees drilling deeper as a definable long-term source, the makeup of the water presents contamination issues. At deeper depths, the water contains more harmful elements than found in shallow wells. For the water to be safe for human consumption, rural water treatment facilities like Regional Water will have to start treating the water using an expensive filtration system.
Probably around $2 million will be the cost to drill one of these deep wells. And that deep well, if we use it in the treatment plant we have right now, it will let us use about 20% deep water to 80% shallow. But it's a ratio that's fixed by chemistry, not by the physics of the water. If we use more water than that from the deep without changing our treatment plant, if we use more water than that without changing our treatment plant, the water quality is going to be unacceptable. People are going to smell something foul on their taps, and I would not be pleased to be selling that water, and I'm not, unless it was the direst of crisis, I don't think the Iowa DNR would want me selling that water.
To complicate matters, the reverse osmosis treatment process currently in use also produces a toxic brine, creating disposal issues for rural municipalities.
Whenever you're looking for a different water source, if you're looking to, try to tap into a deeper aquifer, it's a gamble because you don't really know what you're going to get until you drill down there and start sampling that water. You may have, in your shallow well, you may have some nitrate problems that you have to deal with. But as you go deeper, you might have iron and manganese, and some towns fight arsenic. It's always a new set of problems.
McFarland says going the route of changing sources from groundwater to surface water is also full of challenges.
And then if to totally change everything, if you try to go from groundwater to surface water, that's a whole new set of problems and treatment processes that you have to have set up and designed for. Surface water is when it comes out of a lake or a river. So you got a lot of microorganisms that live in that water. You've got to remove out of that water, plus algae, plus there is a plethora of stuff that live in that water when it's on the surface. In groundwater, you don't have that as much because it's, it can be a couple 100 feet underground and it doesn't support all the life in that water. So it's not always easy just to go from this water source to this water source. I mean, it can be overwhelming to try to change and to have a plant that's set up for that change.
One tool rural communities have been promoting to slow a drought's impact is conservation. Voluntary and mandatory water restrictions help municipalities better manage what water is available in their system.
When people, for just the most automatic reasons, reduce their water usage, we feel that here. If people conserved water on a broader basis, to the extent that was possible, water conservation replaces wells. Water conservation buys us more time before we need to make larger upgrades, expenses in the system. I don't think we'll entirely be able to conserve our way out of this problem, but conservation buys us a lot of time. And time is money, and sometimes time is more precious than money. I don't care if somebody gave me $10 million today, I could not have the water for them tomorrow.
Besides locating new sources of water, officials in rural water districts are searching for better ways to conserve the existing sources on hand. New emerging technology upgrades to water meters in customers' homes will help water districts measure usage more precisely. The upgrades also will help pinpoint problems more quickly, saving thousands of gallons of water annually. Andrew Gakey is the city superintendent for Ashton, Iowa.
So with the new projects, we're getting new water meters. It's going to be better accountability on the water that's being used. We'll have an alarm system that will give us the alarms when needed on water high usage, or a toilet leak, and anything that you can pretty much think of. Cold weather, temperatures, it's all going to give me alarms in the morning. So if there's any alarms, I can check it in the morning and notify the residents. Another benefit of this is that the customer will be able to see a portal that they'll be able to see what their water system is doing also within their home.
Ashton, Iowa joins numerous communities across the Hawkeye State looking for solutions to fix or replace aging water infrastructure. Officials are learning the better the solution, the more expensive it is. In 2016, Gakey informed the Ashton City Council the city's existing storage facility was nearing the end of its 40-year lifespan. The structure had started to leak and was in need of being replaced. But navigating the problem was slow going.
So roughly 5 years, we first noticed that it was leaking, the tank. And about 3 years ago, we probably started getting a little bit more serious with the council on getting it taken care of. And about a year ago, right before COVID, it finally lifted off and we got an engineer on it. And through COVID, it kind of pushed us back another year. So we're about 5 years into it right now.
Other issues Ashton needed to address was aging equipment at every residential meter. The price tag for a new water system for the city is nearly $2 million, an amount officials in the community of 436 have a hard time finding.
Money never goes as far as what it should anymore. We got a long ways to go with a project that should have cost $500,000. Now it's going to cost us at least $600,000 just for a tank. So you still got the pump station and everything else to go along with it.
Gakey and others began looking for federal funds to help offset the cost of the project. In September of 2021, Ashton officials were awarded $1 million to help replace and upgrade the town's drinking water system from USDA's Water and Waste Disposal Loan and Grant Program.
Well, there are a variety of different ways in which we provide assistance in terms of water. In some cases, we are basically creating access to water. In some cases, we're dealing with a wastewater treatment system or a drainage system, or we may be dealing with a stormwater system. All of this is important in terms of quality of life, in terms of the ability of communities to attract businesses to the community, the ability of the community to service the needs of their citizens, the ability to expand population, the ability to ensure safe drinking water. All of that is tied into our water programs.
It's a good feeling to have a big project like this get completed or started. At the same time, I understand how much it's going to raise costs for everybody to pay for it. So it's nice that we can get a little bit of help from USDA to help pay for that fund.
The Iowa Rural Water Association also plays a role in helping rural communities secure funding for infrastructure projects. By using a vast network of connections across the country, Zeb McFarland and IRWA communicate with civil and political leaders on behalf of rural communities to get their project noticed.
One of the things you got to remember is all these senators, politicians, they get asked for money every day. Everything's important. Everything has a need. Everybody has their own project that they want it done. So what these support letters do is let that politician actually read a letter from small town Iowa and to better relay how important of a service we provide and how important it is to help them, and to be able to relay that and to put it in a decision maker's hands. That letter is huge.
According to Clean Water Iowa, a program within the Iowa Department of Agriculture and Land Stewardship, the yearly average rainfall for the Hawkeye State is between 28 and 36 inches. At this amount, 1 acre of land could receive anywhere from 700,000 to 1 million gallons of rain in a year. To help keep this resource in the ground, state and local officials encourage farmers and ranchers to implement conservation measures in the hopes of lessening the impact of future droughts.
Yeah, cover crops are tremendous, and we've seen an explosion of farmers in the state who are planting cover crops. Lock in subsoil moisture. If we do get into drought conditions and you have roots that can hold in that soil, also locks in water vapor. It's a way to keep that moisture in the sponge. Also, given that our trends are showing us higher intensity rainfall events more often, if you have cover crops on those fields, you're not going to lose that soil. You're not going to get into nitrate loss, but you're also acting to sequester carbon within the soil. The soil, as part of the ecosystem, is a great repository for carbon. As we move into the growing season, plants start to pull carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere as they start to grow. So having cover crops on that ground acts in multiple ways, and it's beneficial to farmers. And I think farmers are really taking advantage of putting cover crops in. Also, we talk about edge of field practices such as no-till. You keep residue on top of that soil. You're also locking it in. So you're keeping the soil where it should be. And farmers are, it's been remarkable to see the excitement of just these little things that we can do individually have an impact on the state and on agriculture.
Besides helping conserve the quantity of water in a drought, cover crops have been found to be beneficial for the quality of water across the state as well. In May of 2021, the Iowa Department of Agriculture and Land Stewardship announced a cost-share program for farmers who planted cover crops like rye or oats for the first time.
Farmers have been dealing with weather for as long as we've been farming, and the variability is something that's a reality every single year. Some years too wet, some years too dry. And I think what we look at is what are the tools that farmers have to help improve resiliency? And one of those things we absolutely like is, as you look at tillage, reduced tillage, we think that's got a moisture impact, and cover crops do a good job of being able to hold some of that moisture in place as well. And those are things that, again, those are good for lots of reasons, from a soil health standpoint, from a soil erosion prevention, from a water quality standpoint. There's multiple levels of benefit here that farmers can get from these practices, but resiliency is what we've got to be looking at, and that's in how we use the land, but also the tools that we use to improve crop production and to make us more resilient and be able to withstand some of this weather variability. So there's no one magic solution to this, right? This is how do you manage your system? How do you manage your farm with those tools that you've got at your disposal, the things that make sense in your operation?
Livestock outnumber people 5-1 in the northwest Iowa community of Rock Valley. So when the Sioux County town of just over 4,000 entered extreme drought conditions in the spring of 2021, Rock Valley Rural Water needed a plan to help keep one of the state's most productive agricultural sectors in business.
As far as groundwater and subsoil moisture, I've probably never seen it worse. People that dig and contractors and stuff like that say too, they go down 6, 8, 10 feet and it's powder dry, which I can't ever remember before, all the way down.
Lyle Remerdy and his son co-own Remerdy Farms, a 5,000 head cattle operation south of Rock Valley. They are the third and fourth generations to work on the farm.
And actually even before that, so it's right at 100 years that, somebody who's been, in our family's been doing that. And it's kind of become a way of life, and it's good. It's been very enjoyable. It's been some trials, but it's been very enjoyable.
Remerdy is also on the board of Rock Valley Rural Water, which gives him the ability to be a voice for agriculture when it comes to decision-making on the district's water needs.
75% of the water supplied by the Rural Water District goes to livestock, and Sioux County itself, between dairy and livestock, is just short of 500,000 head of cattle in Sioux County. And I would guess we probably supply 1/5 of the rural water in Sioux County. We kind of look out for each other. The city of Rock Valley is on a little bit different water than what we are, rural water, and the neighboring districts. We realize that if one gets into trouble, we're really there to help everybody else out. So that makes quite a bit of difference. And we realize the water is kind of a gift. It's not necessarily ours, but we like to claim, what our fair share is, and that becomes a difficult say whose it is and whose it isn't, I guess, and we're finding that throughout the United States.
Rock Valley Rural Water serves as a supplemental water source for agricultural and livestock operations in Sioux County. The association takes advantage of an old sand quarry adjacent to its well field to treat its water. The quarry acts as a natural filtration system, slowly recharging the aquifer that serves Rock Valley's wells. Surface water from a nearby creek fills the pit, which helps Rock Valley customers as a secondary source of water when drought conditions worsened over the summer.
The drought would continue to, persist over a long period of time, and be proactive to some of those things, which is our responsibility as a board. But sometimes that takes forms that the general public probably wouldn't understand, as far as, being forward-thinking enough and what those restrictions could look like at a certain instance. But in a severe drought case, we talked before that, it just to be incredibly difficult to get water where it needs to go if we can't normally draw it from our normal sources, and to expand those sources and to get the politicians and boards on board in order to maybe cut a few corners if we need to, in order to get the water where it needs to go. Because once we're in the actual midst of a severe drought, it becomes incredibly difficult to get that done in a little while's time.
Over the summer, Rock Valley Rural Water was facing severe and extreme drought conditions, while simultaneously working on long-term plans for managing future droughts. Remerdy knows implementing conservation measures could be difficult for the livestock industry.
And that's one of the things too, humans can, ration water considerably and, cut out a lot of things that they don't have to do to conserve water. Or consumption of livestock, the water consumption, it is what it is, and you just can't curtail that. You just can't say, well, you're only going to drink half the amount of water today. It's not feasible. So that's one of the things that you just really can't change. So we need to plan for those things and see if we can stay ahead of the curve just a little bit.
The agency purchased ground and began digging new wells to meet future needs. Use of the water from these additional wells faces approval from the DNR, which must test the quality of the water to determine how it needs to be treated.
If you are in a shortage situation, how do you prioritize the usages? We hear about this in other parts of the country. We hear about it in California where there's irrigation and places like that. We don't always think of that here, but I think that's something that we will increasingly have to think about, is especially in situations where you've got shallow wells and what do we need to be looking at there? But that's part of resiliency, even for those livestock producers, is, well, in the face of water shortages, what would you do? Knowing, as we all would, we all would believe that people first when it comes to water, agriculture second, and what's that reality mean for producers?
Predictions by meteorologists at the U.S. Drought Monitor see the potential for the current conditions to persist into next year for some parts of the country. Until then, Iowa rural water districts have to continue the delicate balance between tight municipal funds, satisfying the needs of their customers, and complying with state and federal water regulations. Farmers worried about potential losses due to the drought towards the end of the summer of 2021. Just enough rain fell at just the right time to give parched crops a last-minute boost before harvest. Despite double-digit subsoil moisture deficits in some areas, many farmers reported a record number of bushels per acre for both corn and soybeans for the 2021 harvest. Ample rain showers in late October brought much-needed moisture to fields and streams across Iowa, improving soil conditions for next year.
When we think about how farmers have to deal with this variability and the intensity and the frequency of severe weather events, we think about that through the lens of conservation. The incorporation of things like cover crops and reduced tillage, no-till. Those are things that help with soil health and that prevent soil erosion. They help with holding water in place. We've got some innovation that's coming in the conservation space around drainage water management. How do I take some of that water, get it off the land when I need it to dry out, but hold on to some of it and use it for irrigation when I need it? That's a piece of innovation that we're actually demonstrating and piloting in the state of Iowa today.
Secretary Negg says advancements in new technology can be a potent tool in drought mitigation.
And then we think about all the innovation that crop protection companies have brought, and what's happening in the seed genetic space and with biologicals and nutrient management. These are exciting things. Precision agriculture. These will bring solutions to farmers as well to help them. Again, this is about being resilient in the face of changing weather, changing markets, and trying to adapt. It's something that Iowa and Iowa farmers are very well positioned to do. Why do I know that? Because we've done it in the past. And it'll be essential to our success as a state and certainly as an agriculture well into the future.
Funding for this program was provided by Friends, the Iowa PBS Foundation, as well as generations of families and friends who feel passionate about the programs they watch on Iowa PBS.
Funding for this program was provided by the Gilchrist Foundation, founded by Jocelyn Gilchrist, furthering the philanthropic interests of the Gilchrist family in wildlife and conservation, the arts and public broadcasting, and disaster relief. And by the Claude P. Small, Catherine Small Cousins, and William Carl Cousins Fund at the Quad Cities Community Foundation to support nature programming on Iowa PBS.